It's a real pleasure and an honor for the Auroville Literature Festival and the Value Awards to have with us Namita Gokhale. Namita Gokhale, of course, in session we start by saying that the author needs no introduction. It's a very common way to begin. But here we're talking about someone who's written 11 works of fiction, 8 works of non-fiction, and many more are in the pipeline. Because knowing Namita, one can always expect something new to come. At any point, a very famous anchor at Kitab Khana, I think that was the first possible storyline on books in the country. And then, of course, she's founded the Jaipur Literature Festival. And we have with us Anu Majumdar, who's been the guiding spirit of the Auroville Literature Festival. Because Namita is not to join us, we'll have a conversation with her about the process of writing, about festivals, about so many books that, in fact, it's difficult for me. I was thinking on how to start this conversation. One could have started by the historical timeline, in which case I would have taken Things to Leave Behind and then graduate and then move on to the Blind Matriarch and perhaps the Jaipur journals. That's one way to look at it. The other was to perhaps into the sequence of a story, starting with Paro, which really made her a great name in the year 1984. And of course, her latest book will be read by, extracts of that will be read by Anu, and then we'll have a conversation. So maybe with Paro, Namita, it's a very bold book. When you look back in the 80s, no such book was available in the English language. It was very bold. It was very informative. It talked about life in the corporate world of the 70s and the 80s. So maybe you could start sharing your journey about Paro, and then we'll take the Blind Matriarch.
First of all, I wanted to correct. I've somehow or the other managed to write 21 books, which is more than 8 and 11 adds up to. And I have 2 books coming out by the end of this year or early next year. Okay. So, I mean, it sounds more than I should be doing, because I'm sure quality is suffering by this over productivity. But there is,
no, it is not.
But time is running short. So as one grows older, I want to say, I want to write this, I want to write this. And so I go on about it. Paro was written when I was very young and at a very strange time in my life, because I was studying English literature at St. Mary College. I had got married very young, and a love marriage, very, very. And then in the middle of all these exciting things, I got chucked out of college because I was short of attendance, and a long story, but for a pretty pointless thing. And I decided, okay, that's the end of academics. And I started a film magazine, and something in that film magazine, the publisher, not the editor, but something about working in that film magazine opened me up to the new language of the streets in India. Something like what's his name, introduced in that magnificent book, Midnight's Children. He had introduced a new way of looking at English as she is spoken in India. He broke every rule. But at the same time, Shobha Day was breaking those rules in Stardust. And the language, I mean, such a huge number of Indians was using English, and they were using it in their own unique and exuberant way. So somewhere that vocabulary came into the novel, but not all. It was about a new India, which was aspirational before it had been dubbed aspirational by the economists and the politics. And it was about a slightly wild woman, where wild women have always existed. And Paro was just this character who came to me, who was very, very much her own woman. Green-eyed, gin-drinking person. Well, I don't drink gin and I don't have green eyes, but a lot of people said she's written about herself, and so it went on. But it was a great fun to write that novel. Just today, I went for a swim and I was thinking about it, and I said, you know, I'm more like her than like Paro.
Yes. You know, in fact, the next. I mean, it was not an immediate sequel because Priya was there in Paro, and then Priya is as a very, very middle-class woman with an aspiring husband, and so actually Suresh and RP are also poles apart in many ways. So,
but Priya's the observer, and all novelists are observers. They sit and stare at the rest of the world. That's what I meant. So I'm glad that you brought up Paro, because it'll be 40 years since it was published, and 40 years is a long time for a book to be in print and to be read by many generations and overshadow the author's other books, try as I might. And it's lovely. You know, young people meet me and they say, you wrote this book, and they look at me with a bit of surprise, and I wrote it.
Absolutely. Now, because you mentioned shadows, so let's talk about the Book of Shadows, because the Book of Shadows is a very, very interesting story about Rachita Tiwari. That must have been, written after the acid attacks on women. I mean, what led you to write this particular book, and place it again in the Kumaon Hills, an area which you are very familiar with. So tell us how you created Rachita Tiwari as a character.
I wrote that book around I began writing it around the time when my husband was still alive, and I began writing it. It just came to me. I began writing it, diaries of the missionary, which are somewhere in the middle of the book.
It's not to do with the acid attacks.
The acid attacks came later. I knew about attacks, but it was not influenced. The story of Rachita was not influenced by any real acid attacks. Her story came later because I then, after writing the bits about this old house, I needed to give it a narrative. And the character of Rachita came in as this, who, rather like me, in fact, had been thrown out of Jesus Mary College. And and it was about so many things, about her. I continued with the novel after my husband died. So a lot of the near psychic experience, I think, came from that time when I was very much searching what life was, what death was, what the other world was. But that's maybe one of my favorite books. And I think it's been read much less than a more popular book than Paro, because it's a difficult book to read.
But I must share with the reader that it's a very powerful book, and it's a book that must be read, because if one has to study or to read Namita in clarity, this is a book that has to be read. Now, let me move on to, although I really feel that, when you read her books, the distinction between fiction and non-disappears. I mean, if you read Things to Leave Behind, you get to know everything about the mutiny, you get to know about the survey of India, you get to know about so many things, and you have Tilottama as a fascinating character. But before we go on to this particular work, I thought let's talk about Mountain Echo. It's now a famous festival. Most people think that Mountain Echo is a festival, but Mountain Echo is actually the name of a book which celebrates four very significant Kumaon events. Shivani, everyone knows about. But tell us about the other three women in Mountain Echo.
Well, Marcos, Rolly Books had asked me to do something around which year? It was something year of Indian independence. And I thought, let me write about these independent women. So I started putting interviews with them through. And at that time, they looked much older. I'm about that age, reaching the age they were then, but they look ancient at that time. And through them, I tried to get of their lives and their mothers' lives. So it was 170 years of history, whatever they remembered of their mothers, because I felt that through the eyes of women is not recorded enough, not remembered enough. The changes in the household are not remembered enough. And this magnificent book, which I must tell you that a lot of the material for my subsequent novels came for that. A lot of the material for Things to Leave Behind came from those four women of my grandmother, Shakuntala Pandey, of Jia, who was Ira Pandey's mother-in-law, and beloved Shivani, and so on. It just meant so much to me, that book, personally. But for the Kumaon community around the world, it's a book they often buy, especially the diaspora, to try to remember their thing. And also the Book of Shadows, talking about some of that stuff also came from that book.
Okay. Yeah. So it's again it's a full book, and
it's a resource. And I urge everybody in the audience here to look at it as an exercise everybody can do. We all have a family whose memories will go away when they go away. And the access to transcription and to recording is so much easier. You don't even have the same city anymore. Do Zoom calls, do conversations with your beloved ones, and even if they are big ones, but those with long memories, and record and remember, because, we live in a generation where yesterday seems an time ago, and the past seems plastic and malleable and virtual. But real memories of real people, especially of people who were to us in our past, we carry them in our DNA, but we should also carry them in our living memory. I feel it's really important. You should, everybody should.
And I think this is a very inspiring call that all of us must record. All of us must record, because memory has to be, record has to be written, because that's how memory will help us in resurrecting the present, actually, because the present.
And understanding ourselves, because we also realize that our problems, our joys, they don't change that much. I mean, technology doesn't, they remain the same.
In fact, very famous, as she introduces, I don't know who does it, but she says that we are each other's stories. And I think it's such a powerful statement.
I use that all the time, because in the festival and in everything, because we are nothing but the narratives we know, and even getting forgotten narratives, or the narratives, undiscovered narratives that we don't know, but they are a part of us. Of our hurts, of our learnings, of everything.
Countries, nations, families, communities, which lose control over their narrative, lose something more. And in fact, then there are intangible things.
Correct.
These intangible things do not lead to the growth of GDP. They do not make you a powerful economy, but they are as relevant and as anything else. Tell me something. You mentioned amongst influences Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Kalida. You haven't Shivani. She did not exercise that kind of influence on your writings?
See, those days I never used to read Hindi as much as I now read. Okay. And I used to, in fact, hear about Shivani's stories from my family. Because every time a book came out, a small family in Nainital, or the larger extended one, they would all wonder, who has she written about this time? It was not about the story itself. It was about who might be there. A lot of anguish went into that. And what the transcription which we have, that is actually led me much more into her life. And my daughter is called Shivani, and she was very happy with that. And after I lost my husband, she see me often. She used to meet me. She was very kind to me. And I have to tell you that when the book of this one, Things to Leave Behind, was at the Jaipur LitFest, I had asked Mrinal Pandey to be there with me on the stage. Mrinal, as you know, is her daughter. And Mrinal had given me a sari. She said, this is my mother's saris. Why don't you keep it? So I wore it that day, and I told the audience, that this is Shivaniji's sari here. When I got off the stage, not one, two, not three, at least 4 or 5 women were gathered there, and they said, we want to touch her sari. We want to remember her. I mean, I was so moved. That's the sort of influence she had with her stories. And they were of ruggedly independent women, which the Kumaoni women are independent, but when the rest of India read about their extreme, almost crazed strength through those stories, I think it was inspiring for them all. And for the male readers also, they understood the landscape of the mountains. I mean, it reached out at so many levels to readers across India.
In fact, I was talking to one of the HODs of English, and I was telling them that, under the new education policy, one of the things that, because, that rather than read literature at random, we could actually read the history of India through literature.
I've been thinking of the same thing in a different...
Believe you me, that in the university, we're now going to be starting a syllabus, course on English literature, looking at books in 1900, 1910, 1920, 1930, 1940.
You must talk to me about it. I have some insights to offer. Please, not online, but later we'll talk about it. I really think that is so precious. I think Shivani's story on called Lal Darwaza, I think it's called, on partition, is one of the most stories, looking at through so many lenses. Yeah, Shivani has been a very, very important influence on me. Yeah.
So maybe we'll get at this stage itself, and because your latest book on mystics and skeptics. So Anu, would you like to read a passage, and and then we can quiz? Not quiz is not the right word. We can discuss with.
Ask you,
about some of the things, and then I'll get back. I'll get back to Mrs. Ramachandra Raghuvanshi after.
All right. So, Namita, thank you so much for actually coming online for us. You know, we know the difficulty you've had, and you've been very generous and very kind to do this for us. It means a lot to us at the Auroville Literature Festival. And, you know, to jump directly into your new book, you know, this is a book, I'm just going to hold it up. The Mystics and Mystics. I don't know whether the screen gets it. This, I was going through it, and there are, you know, so many, not only mountain lovers trekking, you know, trek every year who go up from Auroville to, you know, to Kumaon, to Garhwal, to Ladakh. And, you know, like sometimes people come back and say, why did Auroville have to go? Why wasn't it in the mountains? You know, we've had that. But I was looking at it's incredible, the list of people you kind of pull together over here, you know, like you have Milarepa, you have Lal Ded from Ranjit Hoskote, who's here with us today, and Alexandra David Neal, you know, a very good friend of the mother.
Oh, really?
Yes, they were friends in Paris. And when I met Sri Aurobindo, there's a whole thing over there. You know, so I found that very interesting. Then, of course, Dalai Lama, you've got Yogananda, you've got Guru Gobind Singh. I was also very fascinated by the Siddhi Yoga, the Siddhas. You know, that's a very fascinating, the stories you've got there.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So, you know what? I'm just going to read the first paragraph and the ending, which I find also very, and then I'll come to a question for you, and then I'll pass it back to Sanjeev. Okay, so the introduction by Namita Gokhale starts with a quote from the Bhagavad Gita. It says, "Immovable, I am the Himalayas. The Himalayas are sacred to Lord Shiva and Goddess Parvati. Growing up in Kumaon, I felt their presence everywhere, in every leaf and cloud, in every temple bell that chimed, or clang mooing of cows and the leaping langurs, and the occasional slithering snakes that were all blessed by the Lord of all creatures. I saw Shiva in the visage of his consort Parvati, reflected in the rugged Pahari women who went stoically about their everyday chores, often named after her. I saw Nanda and Sunanda, the beloved tutelary deities of Kumaon, in the strength and sea of hill women. I imagined a pantheon of divinities observing us from the clouds above, and sometimes interceding lives." It's lovely. And in the end of this introduction, Namita says, "There is an inner logic that may not at first be apparent to the reader. These are encounters and quests, but they carry the spirit of the seeker, of the search and the continuing journey within them. If the reader gets a sense of our mountains, the mysteries that lie behind the Himalaya, and the blessings and benedictions they carry, this book is done. Its mission accomplished."
Nice.
Wonderful.
So, Namita, tell us a little bit how you put this, how you drew all those very rich and very diverse traditions and people and experiences, and what meant for you putting it all together? What were your high points? What did you discover further?
This was a book, my dear, which I've been meaning to do it for a long time. And I really set about it during the pandemic when it was easier and more difficult to do anything. And I feel a bit of an imposter because I don't really know all about the Himalayas as much as this introduction might imply. I don't know a lot because I love the Himalayas passionately. I've done the Bhutan Literature Festival. We've done something in Nepal. I know the texture of the mountains, and I know their moods. For me, the mountains of at least the Himalayas are not just geographical sort of accidents of some tectonic plate. They are people. They are personalities. They have their own. And I even know the spirit of the Himalaya sometimes. I get the feeling this mountain or this, not this mountain, the mountains are angry with me. I have a feeling a few times. And I mean, this sounds very naive at one level, but I almost so much time there over the years. But for the last 4 or 5 years, they've just not been calling me. Even if I go to the mountains, within a day or two, something will happen down there in the place. I have to come down. So I've just been in exile from the mountains. And this exile, I think, ended this month, because I went for the beautiful mountain festival, which is now the Bhutan Echoes Festival, run by the Bhutanese team, who were also collaborating with us. And they called me, called the other director and the producer, Mita and Pramod. They called us with so much love, so much affection. And I knew mountains were calling me again. And the blessings I got there of so many different levels, those blessings, I cannot even begin to use them. And they were not any spectacular blessings that I can, but they seeped into me. They gave me, and for me and for everybody in so many terms, that it was healing and nurturing the way only a mountain can heal. I think it was Rudyard Kipling, or who was it who said, the mountains are like a mother, and even I shall lift up mine eyes unto the hills, and cometh my help. I mean, there is something to mountains, but they can be very angry. This is something people don't know, but an mountain is an angry mountain. And I think our tourist-struck country does not understand that our mountains are very angry. They are tipping the human being, because the mountains have been the guardians of so many mystical secrets, because elevated spheres, people have very deeply spiritual experiences. What in Bhutan are called the Terma, which are hidden with the Tertons. And even in Hindu religion or any aspect of it, there's always a rahasya. There are things which are meant to be hidden and revealed at the right time to the right people. These very exalted places where there used to be stoic party women doing their bit and doing their thing, but living close to the earth, and all these wandering mystics and sometimes fraudsters also, no doubt, as always happens in life, but some great mystics roamed those mountains. And then suddenly after the pandemic, and with some crazy construction boom, which none of the governments across the Himalayas has understood the implications of, and some crazy construction, but more than that, people with selfies forgetting really to look at their own life. When these tourists come, and I'm saying it, these tourists, when these tourists come, they're not coming like pilgrims. They're not coming in search of anything else. They want to validate themselves. They want to take their photographs at the edge of the cliff, which they frequently fall off into the river below. But the spirit of searching and inquiry into the Himalayas is not the correct one. And I think the Himalayas have shown how angry they are by what they are up to. What has happened in
the recent months,
what has happened in Himachal, what is happening everywhere is an angry mountain.
Yes, yes. And there are beings in those angry mountains, which you have brought into this book. That is there, yes. I'll pass it over back to you, Sanjeev.
Thank you. And what a description of the mountains. What a description about the anger, the love, the passion, the compassion. I think every element the sea is there, and I can feel it now, because
Sanjeev is a Pahadi. Yes.
I see now. One of the most interesting things, I was reading this this book on the search of Sita, and at one level, no one has ever called Sita Mrs. Ramachandra Raghuvanshi. This struck me. This really struck me. That Sita is Sita. Ram, the whole of all of us have always looked at Sita as Sita and not as the spouse of the all looked at Drop. So, it's a fascinating story, and the story of Sita is absolutely fascinating. Now, of course, it becomes slightly political also, with Nepal laying a geographic over Sita. But I think this is a wonderful, because understanding Sita, understanding love and push, understanding how the single mother she brought up her kids, how she looked at Sita is a character. Sita is a person who's much greater. So maybe we would like you to share your thoughts.
Teleserials and all that of 2 decades ago showed her as a victim. Somebody you could feel sorry for. And then once I was in Sri Lanka. I was driving by near Kandy, somewhere near the Ashok one, and I thought, this was illusion, but I thought I saw Sita sitting on a rock weeping. Just imagine. I said, "Aise baithi hogi," and then I said, I have to write it. We have to do an anthology, Understanding Sita. And in the course of that anthology, what I discovered, what all of us discovered was her strength. And this across political parties. I mean, it was fascinating. People said, my brother said, you're going to get us into trouble. But I said, to be funny, nobody gets into trouble. Dhamma will protect us. And indeed it did. There was somebody from the BJP who wrote an article bemoaning and saying, no, Ramchandji was wrong. What happened with Sita? We must look at it more sympathetically and correct those things. And somebody, a card-carrying member of the Communist Party, rose to the defense of Ramchandraji, saying his love was so pure and you don't understand. So it's an enigma. Went on between those two. But surely there was love and respect, but there's also a wounding of Sita, which is carried through across the generations to women today. And that collective wounding of her vulnerability and her strength is not only for Hindus. It's Indian women used to have that vulnerability. I don't know whether things have changed. After this book came out, versions of, there was Chitra Divakaruni, there was
right.
Amish, so many people examined her again, looked at her story, not in a one-dimensional. But what has always struck me is Sita's strength. In fact, when I compare her to Draupadi, I think people think Draupadi was stronger, but I think it was stronger because Sita had more agency.
Right.
Draupadi had horrible things done to her and she vowed to take revenge. But Sita chose to go husband into the forest and live that life, even though the court and everybody had dissuaded her, don't go. But she went, she lived that rough life. She owned against Ravan. He had to respect her because she had that inner dignity. And when she was questioned,
Yes.
she chose to leave. She chose to, without much drama, but with absolute firmness. With the second Agni Pariksha, she said, no, enough is enough. So I think there's so much to be learned from Sita. And it was always Jai Siya Ram. Now we've begun to say Jai Sri Ram, but it was always Jai Siya Ram. And her blessings, and the second book also I wrote around the same theme was Radha, because Radha is the only goddess who, such an unclean sort of a background of it, but it always Radha Krishna,
Yes,
Siya Ram. And that's the intrinsic beauty of Hinduism, that every other religion, the women goddesses, Mother Mary is just Mother Mary. And in Japan, goddess Amaterasu was sent into exile by her brother. There were these goddesses in the Roman pantheons who were exiled one by one. I mean, they all became all-male clubs. But in Hinduism or in India, the goddesses are totally alive and they have not been domesticated, all of them.
absolutely.
Lakshmi has been claimed that people want to domesticate her because everybody wants to keep Lakshmi ji. But I think the goddesses are the strength of India, and they're a deep part of it, because there is inside every woman, there's a woman inside every man. If we can keep that feminine instinct going, and then we are in a very good space.
One question here, Namita, that is, that you have written this book, you have co-authored this book. How is co-authoring different from writing of yourself? Because this is something which will, a lot of our readers will...
We've co-authored, we've co-edited. I've co-authored a book with Dr. Malashri Lal. That's the book we wrote on Dr. Michael on Majumdar. But these three things, we are working on Lakshmi just now, the treasures of Lakshmi. We did Finding, and we did In Search of Sita. And she and I don't think I could co-author with anybody else, but she and I intrinsically able to work together because she knows my strengths and weaknesses. I know her strengths. She has very few weaknesses, I must say. And sometimes just a quick phone call both in the car is enough to keep us going for the next week. So, we have intuitive communication with each other and we balance each other's strengths. And she has an academic mind. I have a crazy creative mind. And that also helps because she keeps it grounded. And I also, because festivals, I'm able to reach out to a lot of people to give us essays and to help curate it. So it all comes together.
It's been a good partnership. So, okay, now,
yes,
we're going to be talking now about the Blind Matriarch. I mean, it's again, a great book which talks about COVID, which talks about pandemic, and the descriptions of Kakanagar are so fascinating. I lived in Kakanagar myself, so this is again a very powerful story. I mean, so tell us about of course, we know that you wrote this book in the middle of the pandemic, or the pandemic ground with this. It's a fascinating story. So tell us about the Blind Matriarch for our readers.
I began that book before the pandemic.
Okay.
Just the beginning. But what happened was, I finished this book called The Jaipur Journals, and it was published.
Yes.
And even while it was being published in the last edition, I was obsessed. I said, I have to write this book called The Blind Matriarch. And all I knew is that there is one old woman, blind woman, on the top 3-story house. That's all I knew. And I still remember 9th of February, I went to Nepal for a conference. And I said, I'm not coming for dinner or anything. I chose the quietest room in the hotel with a very nice view. And I ordered room services. And I sat down and began writing this before the pandemic. So it began as a story about the pandemic. And then I wrote it in real time. I was writing it, I was working on it, and the pandemic was happening around me. So whatever was happening around me came into that record, because everything was so exaggerated in what you observed and what you weren't having access to. And my editor was also she was relatively free. So I did 3 or 4 chapters, I'd send it to her. And the story just happened. I wrote it in less than, I think, 6 months, less than that. And Ma was such a blessing to me. Matangi is one of the Dash Mahavidyas. I never knew, because I knew she had to be called Matangi, but now I have so much about Matangi. And this old, intuitive, very wise woman, all of us have something like that in our family. It may not be our mother, it may not be our mother-in-law, it may be that old aunt, it may be that maid who has been there for ages. But I think most Indians have one wise woman. And that wise woman is everything to the family, She's the one who gives roots. And I'm going to read out, this is a little card about the Blind Matriarch. And this quote, which I found later, after I finished, it's not in the book, and it's from Toni Morrison, and it says, once upon a time, there was an old woman, blind but wise. Or was it a guru perhaps, or a griot, soothing restless children? I have heard the story of one exactly like it in the lore of several years. Once upon a time, there was an old woman, blind, wise. So the blindness is a part of her wisdom, because it gives her access to another inner vision. And this is actually one of my favorite books, and I'm so glad you have appreciated it.
In fact, I find it difficult to decide which is your best book, but my personal favorite, of course, would be Things to Leave Behind. So that's a very, very and the Blind Matriarch, and of course, Searching for Sita. But there is one particular piece which I wanted to read from here. Fantastic piece where Matangi is talking to her grandson. And how old are you, Matangi? Ma asked. You see, I did last night, and you were celebrating your 100th birthday. Matangi loved him and hugged him close. Live forever, my darling, just to be with you. Rahul extricates himself from her arms and says, but explain to me that everybody who is born has to die, like a battery. Robots die too. Trees and plants and flowers and leaves, and the chicken and the fish that we eat. Now putting this great wisdom, putting this in the these words come from the grandson. I mean, what a powerful story this is. I mean, a grandson is trying to understand and appreciate the fact that, even my grandmother will not live forever. And I think this is something so intrinsic. It can only perhaps happen in a family which is rooted in the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Gita, where conversations about life and death on a very regular basis. And I found this fascinating, that even a child is able to, prepare himself for the final, for the final chapter in anyone's life. That I thought was very.
So if I could just say a few words more, I'd say that this was actually a novel about the Indian joint family, which is a bit like India itself. It's dysfunctional to a large extent, but at the same time, every family, however dysfunctional it may be, it has some corner where the weakest and the most vulnerable can manage to hide. And, there are changes in the family. Sometimes that cruel Chacha comes and takes over. Sometimes the kind Dada to lead you along. But always that wise woman is there to hold it through. Yeah. And I think the feminine as she exists in it is what keeps us going. The spirit of the feminine, which, by the way, is not for a woman, because all of us have a man and a woman and so many other things within. And also, if I can say that I've always wondered, because young people today, for the death, like he says, a battery dies, but the battery can be recharged. So everything, lights can go off and on. So our perception of nature and our perception of technology getting so mixed up, we don't know which is which. On that note, thank you for reading my books so carefully. And thank you, Anu, for your very impacting of that introduction. You must contribute once to one of these things. And my deepest apologies for not being in, but what is called a God promise, I'll make a God promise, I'll be there the next time you call.
I was just thinking of your, what you mentioned just now, your book with mine. I think that is something we have to bring you back here. So that's something, to look forward.
I want to say, I haven't read anything, so something inspiring may come to mind, but I feel from my bottom of my heart that the fact that every part of India is holding its own festivals is a bit of the diversity of India, the richness of India, because each festival is like no other, because the language is different, the culture is different, and festivals, while these festivals accept and bring in and share cultural insights with all of India, with South Asia, with the world, yet they celebrate what is uniquely theirs. And Auroville is so unique in its identity, in its personality, in the many areas of genius where there is both intellect, spiritual learning. That I think that this is destined to be a great, great, great festival for those who attend, for those who participate. And remember, in our LitFest, we always say this is not year one, this is year zero.
Okay.
Because that's when year zero, we are understanding the space, we understand, because there has to be a synergy between the spaces, the audiences. These are learnings that come when you go on ground. I watched Sanjeev Chopra bring a festival to life, and I've seen how he's understood from year zero, you learn, and year so different. And I know it'll be the same with Auroville, that once this year you get the hang of it, I'd like to come for many, many more. And I hope both Sanjeev and Anu will come to the Jaipur Literature Festival this February, and I will certainly be there, come hell or high water here. I hope there's no hell and no high water. Come all the blessings of all the babies.
We take your promise, we take your wishes, we take your... Thank you very much. Thank you for being with us virtually, because the virtual is the new reality, and therefore we are glad that you're with us. Thank you.